Greetings, fellow conquerors, this is darkfireslide, and welcome to a video where I'm going to talk about, well, Paradox kind of missing the point. In particular, I'm going to be talking about a development diary that came out on the 11th of April 2017, which, upon the time of this recording, was yesterday. And I kind of wanted to discuss some of the issues with Paradox's, logic, when it comes to the changes that they're making to naval ideas and naval things, and discuss what changes could be made instead, and why I think that it would be better for the game if we did things the way I suggest them. Not to be arrogant or pompous or anything, of course. So let's take a look at what they're doing and why they're doing it. So as the changes in the patch notes read, and I'll leave a link in the description of this development diary in the description of the video. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and read off the points. So each development now provides 30 instead of 25 sailors. Whatever. I don't really. Sailors are almost never a problem for any nation that actually uses them. If they are, well, I guess I just haven't played enough naval nations, because it almost never comes up, and most of the time the problem with ships is money, not sailors. Sailors were just a way implemented by Paradox to stop people from building like 300 heavy ships overnight, which makes sense. But at the same time, it was a very shoehorned-in mechanic that basically all it does is end up screwing nations that only have one port, which I guess sort of makes sense. But at the same time, it's, you think about it. Well, why can't we just draft more people from our country as sailors, even though we only have one port? Like, being a sailor has nothing to do with actually living by the sea, necessarily. At least not as a military profession. I mean, it makes more sense if you've lived by the sea your whole life, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it. Alright, next is naval tradition provides 20% faster sailor recovery instead of 10%. Yeah. So, see, that's not that ability. I think that's just that's just Navy tradition in general. So, I mean, whatever. More sailors, yay. Docks and shipyards have swapped places in the technology tree. Whatever. Autonomy from Burger's estate no longer impacts sailors from development. Sheltered ports and maritime ideas group reduces sailor maintenance by 10%. Let's see which idea is that? That's sheltered ports. Okay. So instead of, okay, so this is on top of global ship repair plus 20%. So, maritime ideas is getting a slight buff in this regard. Yay. The final thing, and this to me is very out of touch, just the way that it's worded and the way that it's presented, and is indicative of an overall problem with both naval and maritime ideas in general in this game. Why almost nobody ever takes them, and why the changes being made in this patch mean nothing. So, I'll just go ahead and read it. We also strengthened the naval idea group by making naval cadets also reduce morale damage from sunk ships by 33%. So, naval cadets. Let's see. So instead of just naval leader fire +1, it now reduces morale damage from friendly sunken ships by 33%. Okay, sure. It sounds useful. It probably is useful, but we'll get to the problem in a minute here. Increases press gangs from 20 to 25% sailor recovery speed, so you get your sailors back faster. Yay. This is, about it'll be slightly better than what Quantity gets for land manpower. The useful kind of manpower. I'm sorry. I'm just being extremely whiny in this video. Let's just go ahead and get through the rest of these, and then I'll actually discuss this on a more serious and less whiny note. We also changed the superior seamanship from 15% naval morale to 10%. So this overall is getting reduced. But it also adds a modifier called 10% naval engagement, or plus 10% naval engagement, which, according to Paradox, gives it lets 10% more of your ships fire every round, which sounds pretty good. If I could get improved flanking range from any of the idea groups for land combat, I would probably take them if I had, like, quantity or something. That, come to think of it, that would be kind of a useful thing for quantity. It makes sense. If you've got more troops, you kind of want to flank around. Anyway, I digress. So what's the problem with these changes? It doesn't really fix the problem with sailors. It's just kind of a band-aid. The problem with sailors isn't one of mathematics, it's one of concept. It doesn't really make sense. It's one of the gamiest things that's been added to EU4 in recent years. Because unlike, normal manpower, it's not like you can only, draft so many people at a time. Like, sailors, you don't typically need as many of them, and the number that you have isn't going to be dependent on, especially for like a so for an actual navy, like a military navy, not just random fishermen, the number of sailors you have is going to be dependent on how much a country commits its resources to actually training people how to do this. The thing about manpower is it represents a number in game that is representative of a recruitable population, a people, boys aged probably 17 or 18 to about 23, maybe a little older than that. Let's say 18 to 28 on average is the age of our actual manpower pool. Just to give kind of a range here. Just to kind of put it into perspective, sailors, on the other hand, you don't really draft in the same way, right? Like, you have to actively, like, recruit people and hire them and teach them, and it's much harder to teach someone how to usefully be on a boat than it does to just give someone a gun and teach them how to march. So sailors working like manpower doesn't really make much sense to me. I think it would be better if you actually made an active investment into how many sailors your country had. That way, even small countries could still, like maybe for a very small sum of military points, you could convert part of your manpower into sailors. And there wasn't really a cap, or maybe there was a cap, but you could turn your manpower into sailors, and that would kind of make sense to me, just because, hey, we've got this recruitable population, why don't we train them, using military points, on how to become sailors? That would make a lot more sense. So, finally I'm going to get to the actual point of this video. And specifically I'm talking about naval ideas, and to a lesser degree maritime ideas, because of the two, maritime is infinitely more useful for a variety of reasons, not the least of which are the fact that A, it's a diplomatic idea group instead of a military one, so the opportunity cost is less if you take maritime ideas versus naval. And as well, maritime ideas gets very, very nice bonuses, like Navy Tradition, which improves your trade, Naval Force Limit, which could let you build more light ships, which improves your trade, reduces the cost of ships, and lets you repair on the go, which helps trade ships. Yeah, so, this actually has some tangible monetary benefit. Naval Ideas, the only thing Naval Ideas does is make your ships better at fighting, but the problem is, at last, that EU4 is not a game based around naval combat. EU4 is a game based around land combat. If you have a great navy but no army, you will die. You will lose, unless you're Great Britain or some other island somewhere, and you are good enough with your navy to stop people from actually invading your country. And the number of nations who can actually utilize a strategy like this are pretty small. They pretty much more or less amount to Great Britain and Denmark, and some of the other nations out in Asia that are island, so like Malaysia, basically. If you happen to be on one of the islands and can actually afford to build a navy in the first place. So the problem with naval ideas isn't that it's bad at making ships better. Naval Ideas does exactly what it promises it does. It makes ships better. The reason that Naval Ideas, that nobody ever takes it, is because it doesn't improve your land army. And if you don't have a land army, you lose. There's like I said, there's very few situations, very few countries where having a navy is more important. And this is if ever, right? Because having a land army as Britain is still useful. Having a large land army as a Malaysian country is still useful. It's not like land army's effectiveness goes away just because you're a country that happens to be able to use a navy. So the problem with naval ideas isn't that it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. The problem with naval ideas is that it doesn't help you in the most important aspect of the game, which is fighting wars and taking land. With the exception of people who don't try to play broad and try to take as many provinces as possible before the end of the game. Obviously, people who play tall in this game are kind of in their own subset because it's a very weird playstyle that doesn't really mesh with EU4's core mechanics that well, in my opinion. But again, I digress. So what can be done about this, right? Like, how can we fix naval ideas? How can we make them more attractive and more appealing? Find ways to make them also improve land things. Not as much as a dedicated land idea group, but enough that it would actually be appealing to people. So let's just throw things out here. So what if press gangs, instead of just giving sailor recovery speed, gave a small amount of manpower recovery speed, like 5-10%, in addition to the sailor recovery speed. This way, it still maintains the focus of being on naval, but at least you still get a land bonus out of it. You still get something useful while maintaining, hey, I'm actually still able to fight and win and play the game like everyone else, even though I took this idea group to focus on my navy. Because as it stands, it's just kind of a dead idea group. There's very, very few situations where having this actually matters. Especially because, land armies have to actually fight most of the time. You can't completely make a land army, like, run away. A navy can, for the most part, usually just chill in a dock somewhere that's not going to get sieged, and they'll be fine. And they'll just sit there for the entire war. And so even if your fleet isn't as big, then it's just going to sit there in port, and you'll be fine. Obviously, unless the province gets sieged, and then you get taken out anyway. But my point still stands that most of the time, you're not going to need a bonus, for Navy in the same way that you need one for land. And the thing is, if you lose your Navy, you just miss out on ducats. That's pretty much it. If you lose your army, you lose out on everything, right? Like, you lose your land, which means you lose your manpower, you lose money, you lose wars, you lose the game if you don't have a land army. But boats, if boats get sunk, well, you just wait up, spend, get more ducats, buy new boats. And I mean, granted, this sort of makes sense, and I'm not trying to knock the overall focus of EU4 here when I say this, because I do think that it's a very, it's imperialism is in a large part about land warfare and conquest, and I wouldn't want it any other way. However, I'm acknowledging that and then realizing that EU4's naval component is not as integral to the game as it probably should be given the time period, and it's also not as relevant given how much you have to spend on it compared to your land army, and while your land army is the one who actually goes forth, takes land, and makes you bigger and stronger for probably about 70 to 80% of nations in this game. Of course, I'm just bullshitting statistics, but again. So I think that thoughts like that would make this idea group more appealing, especially naval. Maritime is actually okay. It's not terrible. It could probably stand to have the same treatment, like maybe a small trade efficiency bonus, maybe I don't even know, like maybe a +1 to diplomatic reputation somewhere in there somehow, just because you have well-traveled diplomats because they're on boats, something like that. That focus for maritime could be really cool to give it, sort of a half bonus, so that there's sort of a conciliary thing for being brave enough to take this group, right? Because it's just not very good. It's just not anywhere near as good as any of the other idea groups. And the same thing, of course, goes for naval, but it's even worse for naval because not just because, hey, well, it does improve the Navy and the Navy's not relevant, it's also the opportunity cost of not having quantity, of not having quality or defensive or offensive or hell, even aristocratic I would take over naval ideas. Even for a country like Great Britain, I would probably take aristocratic over naval ideas. just because the bonuses it provides are going to be useful in most situations, whereas the bonuses that naval ideas provide are going to be useful in not very many situations. And so I think if we gave naval ideas and maritime ideas small bonuses to land, spread across the group, maybe just 3 or 4 ideas, not the whole group, just getting small bonuses to land, it would be much more attractive for nations who could actually make use of naval ideas, or might appeal to countries who want to beat Great Britain, like an enterprising French player who doesn't quite have the navy strength, takes naval ideas, and he isn't at a complete loss for the rest of the game because he used those ideas to beat Great Britain's navy, just by virtue of actually taking naval ideas. And you could say, oh, it would be overpowered if they did that. I don't think it would be, because naval ideas are just, like, boats are just not that relevant to the game. Trade is great, and at the same time, you can just hide your ships. And most of the time when you're fighting wars in EU4, you're probably also winning. Now, granted, what I'm saying is probably not as relevant to the multiplayer, but in single player, this is definitely true. And so all that being said, my final conclusion is, I think Paradox needs to add in some land bonuses to these idea groups, as I've already said, because I think that these will make these idea groups more attractive. More people will take them, and they'll just be useful in general. They'll be an option, is the main thing, right? Like, obviously they're not going to improve your land army nearly as much as an actual land army idea group, but maybe if they can do that about half as well, then there would be a purpose to taking it. And then you would have a superior navy as a result, while still getting a small bonus to your land. Just a very, you could even have something weird like 2.5% discipline in there somewhere, just because of the strict training regimen you give, not just on your sailors, but also on your ground troops. I don't know, something like that. I'm sure that we can brainstorm ideas all day about how to make this work from, like, a logical standpoint. I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say that, like, hey, we've got these great recruitment drives for our sailors, why don't we do that for our land troops as well? So, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments, whether or not you think naval ideas should just be naval ideas, or whether or not you think that, hey, maybe we should give these groups some love, because they are still, to this day, because even from launch, these were basically the worst idea groups in the game, and to this day, years after EU4 has come out, they're still the worst and least picked idea groups in the game. So I'll leave you on that note, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.